Okay, great. Thank you all so much for doing this. I'm very excited to have you all here. So right now we have people in all different spots here on this. So showing what the world really looks like. We have Sweden, Florida. No, you're just in Sweden now. Is anyone San Francisco? Where are we at?
SF here. Yep.
SF. Okay.
Austin, Texas.
Austin. Great. And
Frisco,
Sweden.
Dallas.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go ahead and start. This is, of course, for Global Entrepreneurship Week. We're very excited to be doing this. It's never too early to think global is the topic of the panel. And really, it's about looking at the Nordics as a whole, who are pretty much known as a unicorn factory, wanting to see what we can learn as U.S. startups and companies can take from that to learn how to think global from day one, and talk to we have 3 entrepreneurs on here who are going to talk about their journeys over, and then we have 2 venture capitalists who operate across the Nordics and the U.S. So we're going to get some differing perspectives on it. I'll go ahead and I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves. I'll say who I am first since I'm talking. My name is Charlotte Danielson. I am an attorney for Infinity Law. I've been practicing law for about a little over 22 years, doing corporate work and business immigration work, and do a lot of nonprofit things on the side as well. And I've basically helped companies from all over the world come to the U.S. and set up their operations here, and also help U.S. companies work with foreign talent to bring them in. And so why don't we start with Carl? You want to do like a 2-minute intro of who you are?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Carl Fridtjofsson. I'm originally Swedish, but been in the Bay Area for 7-8 years. I'm a former founder, so did a couple of startups myself, and one of them brought me from Sweden to the US. But as of 4 or 5 years ago or so, I'm a partner with Creandum, which is an early stage venture fund that originates out of Sweden. And we do seed and A rounds mostly all across Europe, and then selectively also in the US. So I think I know the Nordic startup ecosystem, both as a founder and as an investor.
Great. And Michelle, we'll have you go next. Do the venture capitals first.
So my name is Michelle Wandell. Also have originally a entrepreneurial background. I'm, despite my name, actually originally from Finland. Spent about 25 years in the Bay Area, 8 years in France, and some other shorter stints. Stockholm for a number of years. Started companies in many of these places, and actually through an acquisition ended up in the Bay Area in the mid-90s. And then started a venture fund back in 1999 called Nexit Ventures that has most of its activities in the Nordic countries, where we have invested primarily in early stage stuff, now moving more towards sort of growth stage, as there is very, very much early stage activity in those areas. And a couple of years ago, actually moved from the Bay Area to Austin, just as I sort of think that this is a good place maybe for companies from Europe and from the Nordic area to land going forward, given all of the dynamics that we have, and I of course have watched over the past 25 years in the Bay Area.
Okay, and let's go with Matthias.
Okay. Thanks so much. I'm not the investor here. I'm just the entrepreneur. And well, it started 15 years ago when I got fired from a company because I was totally unmanageable. So I realized I should probably go into more entrepreneurial stuff. So together with my wingmate Henrik, I actually have 6 companies under my belt. And Picket that we started 7 years ago is actually the first one that has gone global. It is a digital asset management service. And we claim to be the simplest dam system in the world. And our journey to that position has been through, or together with Microsoft, where we actually created an add-in that was supposed to replace clip art. If you remember the old ugly illustrations that you can find in PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. So a year and a half ago, we actually gained the position as the #1 downloaded and used add-in or app in the Microsoft Office 365 ecosystem globally. And right now I'm in Sweden. We relocated a bit from Seattle, where I've spent the last 6 years playing around with the guys in the sandbox in Redmond, i.e. the Microsoft land.
Great, thank you. Peter, let's go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Peter Sibner. I'm the president of ESMG North America, which is the U.S. affiliate of Media Group. We're based in Stockholm, Sweden, and I've been over here for about 2 years now running our U.S. affiliate from Tampa, Florida. Eversport Media Group, I'm not an investor. I'm in a similar situation to Matthias there. I was sent over here because I was essentially unmanageable. And I was running a project within Eversport Media Group that kind of got a little bit of a leg of its own. So I'm not sure whether I'm an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. But either way, I'm here. And Eversport Media Group is a digital publisher and a sports media technology company. We have our own portfolio of sports media websites, but we're also a content and technology provider for other media companies within our industry. We deliver sports statistics, technology services to professional hockey teams, agencies, leagues, and we're also specialized in content production for the sports betting industry. I've been with the company now for about 9 years, and I've been over here for the past 2 years. Been a bit of a rocky road, especially this last year with everything that's been going on in sports, but it has actually turned out to be pretty good for our company in the end, and we managed to establish a foothold over here now, 6 full-time employees and a number of contractors in US and Canada. And the North American company is expected to grow maybe another 100% next year. So for us, the pandemic has actually been somewhat of a blessing this year, crazy enough.
That's good to hear, actually. That's a little bit more of a rare story than what we're typically hearing these days. Okay, Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to the Fort Worth Global Entrepreneurs Week for having us. It's the 2nd year in a row. So my name is Patrick Melander. I'm an entrepreneur. Daytime, I do 2 things really. I started a company called Connect 5G about 1.5 years ago. And we do literally that. We connect 5G, 4G, 3G, and 2G in the United States. So it's a lot of things happening in the telecom market. The second thing I do is I support growth companies to establish in the AI and IoT space. And one of the companies which I was invited to speak about today is Sensative AB in Sweden, Lund. It's a company with the founder he invented Bluetooth with his team many years ago, and now I believe that they are on their way of inventing the Android for anything smart, if you will. They have patented the invisible sensor. I'll speak a bit more about that, and on their way to establish here. So what I do in that context, I'm their partner for international growth, and I help some other companies on their board of directors and things like that. Non-profit-wise, me and Charlotte are colleagues. I'm the chairman of the Swedish American Chamber in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I have the pleasure of having Charlotte on the board.
Like Michelle, I have, even though I'm in the Bay Area, I have been noticing that Texas is very much a booming place to be, and so joined the board there, and sort of have been doing more things like this Global Entrepreneurship Week for that very reason. So yeah.
So just a note on my note apart from that. So I'm Swedish of origin, and I lived 25 years abroad. I lived in Asia, I lived in Latin America, in the Middle East, and this was the third time I moved to the US. So now I'm here permanently in Dallas. So
okay. And we're all rebels without a cause, I think, is the unmanageable rebels. I think that goes for everyone, probably. All right. Want to start off to sort of give a little bit of a background on the Nordics. I know a lot of people sort of Silicon Valley, it's actually pretty well known, the Nordic region. I know in Dallas might not be quite as much, but the Nordics, the small northern part of Europe, has actually done an amazing job with technology, and Stockholm is actually ranked as number 2 per capita in building unicorns, having unicorns come out of their companies valued at over $1 billion, next to Silicon Valley. And the other Nordic countries, honestly, are not far behind that, and we see they score very highly on the innovation index. And you know, as Matthias mentioned, it's a cold, dark place there right now. So what's the key there to getting all of the innovation? What is the secret sauce? And we'll start with that. And I want to sort of start with, we'll start with Carl, and you can sort of give your input on what is it that the Nordics are doing that has made them special and has been able to produce all of these amazing results.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, there's 4 reasons that we have been having that success, and you have to go relatively far back in time here. I think the first reason is that Sweden, as a country, we invested into technological on. We had the fastest internet in the world, the highest internet penetration in the world for many years. We were way ahead of many other countries. And this just trained the Swedish population to be very savvy using technology. And it obviously also allowed us the abilities to test digital solutions much earlier than a lot of other countries. So there's no coincidence why, for example, piracy to a decent extent came out of Sweden as well, because we had the bandwidth to actually share and download a lot of large files where most other people couldn't. So that's why Pirate Bay and Kazan and some of these things were started there. So I think the fact that Sweden invested into broadband infrastructure very early on is a key enabler to this. Second one is on the political side. I think the social infrastructure of Sweden has allowed us to obviously have access to higher education and healthcare and all these things, that it just allows you to, if you want to take risk, that doesn't leave you out on the street if things fail, right? So there's just an underbuilt safety net and access to the potential tools that you need in order to start a business that has been in Sweden for a long time as well. And then I think it's a small country, and it's an internationally mindset country. So everyone in Sweden speaks English. If you happen to be an ambitious entrepreneur, you think international from day one by default. A success in Sweden generally isn't enough to fill your urge as a founder. So this means you initially from day one, you start thinking about other markets to conquer and how you will do that. And you build the teams to really serve an international growth trajectory from day one. And then the fourth component here is that we were lucky enough to have kind of the Bjorn Borg effect that we had in tennis in the 70s, that we had a role model that created a generation of new tennis players coming in. And we had that in tech as well. So the first batch, you know, with Niklas Sundström and Skype and MySQL and some of these other companies, that really showed that in this small little country, Sweden, you could build global products and really have major success. And by providing these examples to people early on, it just gave people the ambition and the belief that they could do it themselves. And that's why we had the second batch of companies, which is the one you referred to, why Sweden has this high per capita unicorn rate with Spotify and Klarna and King.com and iZettle and these companies. So I think these 4 things in tandem, you know, it just made the stars align that truly built an ecosystem in its broadest definition in Sweden. And that's what and the Nordics, I should say. And that's what we have these today, right? So we have shown success across the range, from early investors to founders to early employees to big corporates, and all these things just feed each other and it just creates a very fruitful ecosystem. And this is what Silicon Valley had 50 years ago, and we started it 20 years ago, and we're reaping the benefits of that today.
Great. Michelle, want to add anything there?
That was actually a pretty well covering description, I think, overall. And yes, Sweden probably in comparison to all of the other Nordic countries sort of stands out and is a little bit ahead. I think that one thing that still goes for all of these countries, or a couple of additional points, is maybe the fact that in general the educational system is just very good, and the fact that people, regardless of their background, have the opportunity to actually do and develop in areas where they are and they can become the best, I think gives us a much broader base per capita than what you get, for example, in this country, where lots of people do not have the same opportunity for education. And then I would say that the governments in all of the Nordic countries have definitely played a role in terms of having taken a very active role in trying to help to build and develop an ecosystem for startups and all of the funding and those types of activities that they have supported over the years. And all of them do not work to the best, but on average still it has been a great help. And I would say maybe specifically in Finland, which potentially could, or probably could be seen as being the country or the culture with the least sort of entrepreneurial spirit if you go 10, 20 years back. And that has switched massively in that time period. And I think that actually the funding instruments and that kind of type of activity that has been ongoing there for a long time has really helped. But all in all, it's something that we can all be proud of, having sort of coming from the Nordic countries, because we're really well positioned worldwide on when it comes to entrepreneurship.
So a question actually for Carl and Michelle. You both kind of mentioned, springing off of what you just said, you said the Björn Borg effect, or we'll call it the Skype effect for those who are younger and don't know who Björn Borg is. But I'm old enough to remember where entrepreneurship in the Nordics was like, it was not something that you did. And there's been a drastic change where it is very much encouraged. And you mentioned, Michelle, sort of the financial institutions kind of stepping in or helping to moderate that as well. And Carl, you mentioned this Skype effect. What do you think? What was the key there? So if you're looking at what was it, just the success of Skype? What actually turned that culture around from a cultural perspective? Why see that change? I mean, everything kind of lined up. The governments, everything lined up to support it. But why did it actually change, or how? What's the key in it?
I think sort of that it actually is. I haven't heard the expression the Björn Borg effect previously, but I think that was it. In that, in all of these countries, we had a couple of people who clearly were born to be entrepreneurs, who did it and they succeeded, and they took a very active role in trying to sort of be open about their success and how it comes, and that it's available to everybody. And all of these people have put their own money into circulation. They have become very active seed investors and angel investors, and they have sort of shared their experiences and their knowledge very generously and broadly. So I think that it's something, again, that really is based on I think the societal value system and so forth that you have in the Nordics, that it's okay to do this, and it's, you know, you don't keep good things only to yourself, but you try to spread them.
So really, it was the successful rule breakers, right? Is that was enough inspiration to move it over?
I'll just add that we were lucky as well, specifically in Sweden, that some of these successful companies that we're now referring to were mass market consumer companies. So it just had like this enormous penetration across the population of Sweden and the Nordics and the world that just gave everybody this tangible understanding what the output of entrepreneurship could be. Right, everybody knows what Spotify is around the world, kind of thing today, right? And it's phenomenal, and the equivalent was with Skype at this heydays, right? And I think that was also we were lucky that some of these role models that were skilled enough to build companies were also doing it in kind of these mass market potential products, and that just gave another dimension to kind of the platform of how far this message could reach. And you know, this creating role model is key here, right? And people realizing the opportunity, making it cool to be a founder, making it you become proud that you're a founder, all these things, right? So yeah, I think that played into it as well.
Absolutely.
Great. So now, from the company perspective, let's sort of see some examples here of thinking global from day one, and how the company progressed from being in the Nordics to sort of transitioning over to the US. When and why in your company's process did that happen? Matthias, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think it's interesting to hear what Michelle and Carl is talking about. I mean, we were super lucky because we launched like a beta version of Picket, and we actually got some take up from like 54 countries or something like that. So we were more aiming for like not necessarily the consumer, but we're more going for like the prosumer in that sense, so the Office 365 user. And so we were lucky to start to understand that you know, we actually have a market outside Sweden. At the same time, we have a great like safety net. We have great technology infrastructure and things like that. I think that there's also a little bit of a misunderstanding. Being and becoming an entrepreneur is not that hard, but being an entrepreneur is pretty hard work, actually. A lot of people are starting up stuff, and they think that they can create the next Spotify in like 3 to 6 months. If it's like a little bit longer, it's going to take 12 to 18. So, I mean, that is the kind of situation you have. But what we did was, in order to actually make sure that we can actually, you know, go outside the Swedish borders, we thought that we needed to have like an anchor partner, or like an anchor customer, or an anchor like a deal before we started to look outside Sweden. And I think that is very important, because I also hear a lot of companies that are starting up in the US or starting up outside the Nordics, and they are having a tough time because it's not super easy. You think that everything is like the Swedish culture. You think that everything is great in Sweden, but you need to understand that there are like cultural differences. We drive the same kind of cars, we wear the same kind of clothes, but on a daily basis, there are so many small differences that sums up to like a very big difference in the end. So in our case, I started to travel back and forth. I actually had 26 cross-Atlantic flights in 1 year. And after those 26 flights, my back was hurting, and my sleep didn't really work. So we decided to wouldn't have had Microsoft, as I said, as my anchor partner, I would probably try to find someone else, actually, because it's super important to know what you're going for. Yeah, so that is kind of our journey in that sense. 26 transatlantic flights, walking the hallways of Microsoft, or actually I was skateboarding because I thought Microsoft was such a boring place. So I brought a pink Picket skateboard. So I was skateboarding down the hallways and met as many people as I could, just in order to create some kind of network.
Great. Peter, how about you? What's the story, the journey over?
Yeah, well, so the primary reason for Eversport Media Group, going into the U.S. market was I think we all kind of have this in common is, it's just basically the sheer size of the market. The United States is 33 times the size of Sweden. You touched on this, some of you guys. We're a small country of 10 million people with, we have our own unique language, and you're always taught to think globally, basically, because out there in the big wild world, no one is going to understand you. So you teach everybody to speak English when they're 9 years old, and every business has a global mindset, I would say. So for us, it was obviously the market size, but also the fact that we happen to have an entry ticket. And that was actually the strong growth of our Elite Prospects brand in North America. And Elite Prospects, as any other startup, it was founded off the passion of one guy sitting in his basement in Sweden in 1999 and writing about hockey. And he decided to do it in English so he could hang out with his new friends on the internet. And that's how Elite Prospects started. And many of you may not know what Elite Prospects is, but in brief, it's one of the world's largest sites for ice hockey. So we found ourselves having audience of more than 1 million users, and the absolute majority of them were in North America, and we were all in Sweden. So we just needed. Matthias, I was like you. I had not 26, but I had probably 18 or 20 cross-Atlantic flights in 1 year. So eventually they said, Peter, why don't you just go over there and basically set up shop? We had gotten more and more professional clients on this side of the pond. We had an agreement with the National Hockey League, and for us, it just made sense. It wasn't necessarily part of a big growth strategy. It was just to set up shop where your clients are, basically. And also one thing that really caused us to make the decision to go here was the legalization of sports betting in the U.S., because that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it has been a very big revenue driver for media technology companies and digital publishers, which we are both. It's been a big revenue driver in Europe for the past 15 to 20 years. And with the US market opening up for online sports betting, that was just a place that we needed to be in. And since we had the entry ticket and a lot of really good reference clients, for us, the transition hasn't really been that big. We were already doing business with Canada and the US. That's been my main focal point for the past 4 or 5 years. But now that we're here, it's really impressive how fast things can grow once you start getting that foothold and once you start getting some leverage from your US client. Transaction is so much larger. Every transaction comes so much more potential, but also every potential comes with so much more risk. So you really got to weigh your options a little bit more. And the cultural differences, obviously, you've touched on those. For us, it wasn't really that much of a big deal because we're an authority in our little niche of ice hockey, and everybody already knew our brand name. So that has gotten us a long way. But still, it doesn't matter if we had a solid, profitable company behind us. And still, when you hit U.S. soil, when Charlotte you your visa and you finally have the company set up, all of a sudden you have a hassle even trying to get yourself a phone number for the company. Mm-hmm. There's so many things with finances and taxes and legalities that you have to figure out. So, I mean, even if you're working for a fairly big company, you're an entrepreneur from day one. You hit U.S. soil, and it feels like starting up a brand new company again. So, yeah. But for us, it was definitely the market potential. Everything is 10 times bigger over here, and I think that's what drives a lot of Swedish companies and Nordic companies to try the U.S. market. I've been working here in the past 15 years ago. Many of them fail. So you really gotta respect the differences in culture. That's my main takeaway from these past 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick.
Okay, so if I speak about sensitive, early on there was a decision to go to the US, and the big question for us and speaking to the founders was really, do we do an Atlantic flip? Why would you do an Atlantic flip? Obviously the market in the US is so large, but the other thing is you may have much better valuations, so you would get better multiples on your exit. Now, the thing is, and I think it's really interesting to see with the success of Sweden in the startup space and launching unicorns, is that now there's more and more capital available actually in Stockholm, in Sweden, which was quite unexpected, at least for me. So in terms of, it was an early decision. It was likely that's how the exit would happen. But the other reason why the US and why being in the US really is the size of the US. Obviously, like my colleagues here have said. And the second thing is you also, from a market perspective, what Sensitive does is Internet of Things for anything smart. So smart city, it's smart buildings and smart utilities. If you look where Sweden is from a digitalization perspective of these aspects, quite a few years ahead of the US. So there's a huge market opportunity to bring that to the US. So that was really another reason as well to come. So really good market. And we did decide on when do we do this? Well, everyone knows you need some capital to do the establishment. So we decided it would be after we completed our Series A, and we did complete, let's call it sprint 1 of Series A in late last year. And then exactly, we literally had established our C Corp in Delaware, then COVID hit. So then it became a bit of a hurdle. It's not that many people that want anyone to come into your home and set up sensors, right? So the sensor side of things slowed down, but the digitalization side of the business, which is we have like an operating system for anything smart, that has really gotten legs. So that has developed really nicely. So I believe there will be a catch-up effect. Like most people see that, yes, there's a bit of a COVID impact on stuff that have been COVID affected, but digitalization trends probably, I know many large companies had a 10-year digitization plan, including Facebook. They achieved their 10-year plan in 7 months, right? So the digitization will just come in a huge effect whenever we're out of the crisis. So we landed, we're ready to go, and we are getting firm major orders that will multiply the company just from the US. So it looks really promising going forward.
Great, thank you. So Carl actually a few years back wrote a very controversial article at the time when Silicon Valley was really popping, and he said Silicon Valley has peaked. I think that we've seen a little bit more that this has actually very much played out as other ecosystems are growing quite a bit. And including now, for example, the fact that Michelle decided that Austin was the place to be. Do you agree with that? Silicon Valley has peaked, and do you see opportunities for other ecosystems as a result of that? Not that Silicon Valley is going anywhere anytime soon, but just that there are opportunities. Finally, there's not the sort of stronghold or that existed here before. Carl, I'll have you start.
Well, yeah, so I wrote that thing a couple of years ago, and the world has changed quite a bit since then. And I usually don't think I'm good at predicting the world, but in that instance, I actually think I was right. I do think Silicon Valley really has peaked, but maybe it peaked, leading up to just this COVID crisis. The reason being that Silicon Valley used to be tech. Tech used to be Silicon Valley. They were the same thing. And if you wanted to participate in that kind of industry, this was the place to be. And tech today is really remote. I mean, that's where tech is today. The default way of people organizing a company today is with one dimension of distributed teams. Doesn't mean fully, but at least there's some dimension, more or less across the board. So today we have opened up to become much more of a distributed and globally immersed ecosystem. Now, there's obviously so much more depth in Silicon Valley in terms of experience and track record than across other places. But what you are seeing is a pretty dramatic spillage of that talent out into other parts of the world, where suddenly it's now become accepted that the opportunity can be pursued living elsewhere as well. So a lot of people, just like Michelle, moved away from Silicon Valley, and there's more people doing that. And clearly, just information and best practices and tools, they move instantly from wherever they were first invented and are now adopted anywhere else in the world. That used to also be monopolized by Silicon Valley, and it took a while for those kind of trends to emerge to elsewhere. But those things just happen much more dramatically as well. So looking at this from a purely kind of investor perspective, being predominantly exposed into Europe and the Nordic region, it used to be the norm for us that companies that we were engaged with that wanted to raise money from US investors, they had to go to Silicon Valley often and meet them here on the ground. And generally the pitch involved that, yeah, if you invest, we're going to go into the US and I'm going to move over here and we're going to set up an office. We can meet every day, yada, 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 right? That's no longer the case. Investors are flying every day, even during COVID era, weirdly enough, into Europe, trying to meet with companies on the ground there, doing deals there, much, much further away from kind of the closeness of what Silicon Valley used to be defined as. So I think this is great for everyone. I think it means that you can build companies much more aligned with your own personal lifestyle and preferences and what you want to do. And clearly it just means that the spirit of entrepreneurship can be distributed across much wider places of the world. So I hope that this trend will only continue and we'll see more of it. And I do believe even long-term, Silicon Valley will always be kind of the mecca for tech, right? This will be the gathering spot, but we'll see just more and more examples of companies that succeed in other places of the world. And the more of those success stories we have, go back to the Bjorn Borg effect, the more that develops those ecosystems. So Silicon Valley used to be a must-have. It's now a nice-to-have, and maybe not even a nice-to-have. It's now just one of the components that enables entrepreneurship anywhere.
Yeah, so before I move to you, Michelle, I wanted to sort of just point out some statistics from, so Silicon Valley, you have almost 50% of the big tech companies were started by immigrants. You have as well, the STEM talent in the Bay Area is something like 45%. And so one of the things, and one of the reasons I started to really pay attention to Texas was because the H-1B visa, which is the main visa that tech professionals use to come to the U.S., Texas is now number 2 in number of H-1B visas. coming. So you're getting a lot of STEM talent coming into Texas, not just Austin, but Dallas as well. So wanted to sort of get your inputs on that as well, what the ecosystem's looking like, Michelle.
So the ecosystem here, I must say that I feel like that this place feels today to some extent as Silicon Valley felt in the mid-90s. And in sort of many positive senses, actually, there is a sort of less of a sort of strict focus on, you know, making money, which has become the main focus on Silicon Valley. It's much more of a focus of succeeding, and there is sort of entrepreneurship and the whole sharing culture, which was a key of the enablers for Silicon Valley, has deteriorated in the Bay Area. But it's very, very sort of present here, in that people still think that by sharing information and cooperating more than competing, everybody can achieve more. And so I think, and it has actually nothing to do with Austin per se. I mean, Austin has to some extent slightly similar sort of strains going as the Valley had, where, you know, HP and some of these older tech companies sort of were based there for a long time. Here you have Dell, and you have had National Instruments and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of that relationship going. There is also a really good university here that has the same impact as Stanford and Berkeley has had in the Bay Area. The early sort of tech wave from here has provided some of the funding the similar way as those, you know, Intel and the whole semiconductor sort of pedigree provided funding in the Valley in the 80s and 90s. And so lots of similarities, but then some of the big draws here is that cost of living is such that actually young people can make a decent living here without, you know, stacking up 8 people in a small apartment.
No one needs to sleep in the closet there.
The closets are bigger at least. But so that's sort of one big thing. And then again, the universities here that draw tons of people from abroad, they come here, and most of them come for their sort of own American dream, and they want to build their thing. And luckily, because of not only COVID, but sort of everything being so more sort of possible and able for distribution or being distributed, it is much easier. And I think, you know, if I look at for example, companies coming from the Nordics or from Europe or from anywhere, you know, if you want to go to and sort of base your US operations in Silicon Valley, you have to have a really goddamn good reason to do it, at least on my penny. But those reasons are there. You know, if you work very, very closely with Facebook, Google, or Salesforce, or you know, some of these big behemoths, and you need to be close to them, then yes, because I think that still companies in the future also will need to stay close to their customers in different ways. It's not all going to be virtual, but lots of things do not need to be close to the customers. And those kinds of things then can, in this country, very well take place, you know, whether it be here or in Boulder or in Portland, or, you know, there's lots of places that has similar kinds of roles as Austin does today.
So one of our attendees here, Cameron, is asking a question. If you think thinking globally will help your countries grow. And I wanted to oops. I'll start off a little bit by just talking about the research that I've seen as a whole on that. That I've seen as a whole on that, and that is basically with the Nordic model anyway, what tends to happen is that, or what people fear is that, oh, well, if the company goes global or leaves the region, so if you're looking at DFW, for example, and you're worried that, oh, well, if our companies are a success, they're going to go away, and there goes our region. In the Nordics, we haven't seen that being the case. Most of the studies we've sort of looked at, and I did one a few years ago with Nordic startups in the Bay Area, where we looked at something like 200 companies. It ends up being that it's very much a distributed model. You have still your engineering staff or whatever you think is essential in the Nordic country, and then you have sales teams or whatever in Silicon Valley. And so, especially now with COVID, it kind of, you can comment both on, I'm going to ask all of you to comment, both on Cameron's question there, and also adding in the COVID pandemic here and how that has actually helped move the U.S. too towards more of a distributed teams versus before everything in the U.S. pretty much just you had to be in the office and that's how it is. The Nordics obviously have been working across time zones for a long time and really understand how to work in teams that are spread out. Why don't we have Peter, if you want to start with that, what your best practices are for that, or whether you think it helps the local country to grow, and whatever your thoughts are on that region.
Yeah, well, for us as a company, we've always worked this way. We have, I think, 5 hubs in Sweden. We have all our development these the last couple of years have been taking place in Riga, Latvia. And for elite prospects, I've had most of my clients over in North America for the past 6 years. So what happened with the COVID pandemic was actually nothing new to us. This was just the way we worked. And I think a lot of companies already had that in place. What I think is especially true for the Nordic countries is the high level of trust companies, their employees, to actually be doing their jobs on a daily basis. Because, working remote was not really a big deal. It didn't take any kind of culture shift at all, basically, because there's always been that high level of trust in your employees to be doing their daily work without having to be in an office. It is something that has been talked about over the past 10 years with regards to climate change. Travel less, have more meetings over Skype, and now I guess Zoom is the hottest place to have that meeting. But either way, technology has powered a lot of Nordic companies that has grown internationally over these last 10 years. So I don't think it was really for those companies to turn their workflow around when the COVID pandemic hit. And I think that is a potential success factor for sure.
So anyone else can jump onto that one, and I'll throw in then, based on what you just said, leadership styles in the US have been a little bit different than what you've talked about with the Nordics, whereas you've had a lot more of the clock in, clock out kind of mentality, and there are a lot of companies that kind of struggle with trusting their employees to work remotely, and they're micromanaging sort of online. What is in your experiences through that, the best way to manage remote employees in a way that it's productive? Anyone that feels like taking that one, go ahead.
I think that we have seen a pretty big challenge when it comes to, all the projects that was defined before the COVID-19 situation. All those projects are just running fine. I think we totally see a challenge when it comes to the more creative stuff or the more development related discussions. That is one of the biggest challenges that we see, actually. We have been traveling a lot in the company. We always had some people coming over from Sweden to Seattle. We had some people going from Seattle to Sweden. And when there is a physical meeting, there is always some kind of magic happening. At the same time, we have been discussing a lot why we have been flying that much. before this situation because we can manage just fine remote. I mean, we were prepared, like Peter said. We were a distributed company before this, so we had people in Spain, Russia, Sweden, US, and I mean, we didn't really have a choice in that sense. But as I said in the beginning, I think that all the defined projects are really doing fine. I would say that sometimes you actually see some higher productivity in those projects. But when it comes to the more business development or product development stuff, it's a challenge for us, I think.
Carl, how about you? Any insights on the culture part of this? And to use Matthias's phrase there, the magic, to keep that sort of more spontaneous magic happening that would happen in a room with people together. Are there best practices you suggest for that, for companies to function at their peak?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's a generation of tools that are trying to solve for these problems that are coming up now. And who knows which one of these will stick and really work well or not. But I think what you're touching upon here, Matthias, is the key challenge for most remote teams in figuring it out. And I don't necessarily have the blueprint and the silver bullet on how to solve that, but I'm fairly confident that with a next generation of tools, as well as with a next generation of kind of culture and expectation of how a team collaborates, like redefining that, because it won't be the same, you know, let's gather in a room, brainstorm with post-it notes and whiteboard. Like, it'll be something else. And I think organizations have to really work hard in order to find that creativity elsewhere. Luckily, you know, the whole world is kind of going through this transition together right now, and we're all faced with the same challenge. So I'm hopeful that the best practices around this will start to evolve fairly soon, and we'll learn how to adapt to this situation as well. Because I don't think that the world's going back to what it used to be. I'm fairly certain that we'll stay in a distributed first environment when it comes to tech, at least, as the primary means of collaboration.
Okay. If I can, got some few audience questions. So we're running out of time, so I'll have you start with that one. Hopefully you can answer this one, Patrick. Do you see equal rates of entrepreneurship between men and women in Nordic countries?
Wow, I actually don't have statistics on that. Does anyone have statistics on that? I think I can say for sure it's more equal than on this call.
Yeah.
We're only men.
Yeah. We actually, in seeing in the study I mentioned that we did, we actually saw that the rate of entrepreneurship coming over, entrepreneurs coming this way from Sweden is a lot lower than what you would expect. It's a small number. But in Sweden itself, there's a lot more equality between the men and women.
We have a little bit of data on this. We try to measure this ourselves here from the kind of Creandum funnel. And in terms of deal flow that is passing through us, the number of companies that have a female founder is low, unfortunately. It is in the kind of 15 to 20% range of companies that have women representation in the founder. And we also measure this within our portfolios. We measure every portfolio company on a regular basis across a few different dimensions. So we measure on the entire organization, across the management team, and across the board. And our most recent data here is that about 40% of employees within the Creandum portfolio are female, 60% men. And on management team, it's about a third, a little less than that. I think 31% of women are part of the management team. And on the board level, it's even worse. It's about 11%. So kind of the more senior you go into this, the bigger the drop-off is in terms of the equal distribution. Wow. And from our perspective, I think this is a really important topic, and we work hard on trying to do what we can here. But I think it's also important not to only think about this on the founder level. I think it's really important because the biggest successes are the unicorns that we refer to, and they don't build the 2-3 co-founders and their career and their role model. They actually build thousands of people's careers, and I think that's where at least we're trying to really push hard. on the companies that are scaling up to make sure that they think about diversity as kind of a key priority for them.
And last question is actually for you, Michelle. The European education system uses a tracking platform, very common in Germany, for instance. Do you think our educational system in the US should adopt a similar model where we embed assessment tools to identify our entrepreneurial minds?
I am not familiar with the subject to the extent that I could really have an opinion, but I think that when it comes to sort of specifically lower level education or earlier level education here in the States, that they have a lot to learn from what goes on in the Nordic countries or in Europe. Higher level education clearly is at a good level here. Not to say that it would be bad there either, but there isn't that much of a difference maybe. But I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Allison, I would like to say to you that I actually have a panel on Friday morning with university directors from all parts of Europe and Texas, and they're going to be discussing entrepreneurship and sort of having a roundtable discussing their various systems and successes and drawbacks and learning from each other. So that probably is the right place to go to ask that question and see what's happening. Anyway, we are out of time. I'd like to thank you all for doing this. It's great.